A giant rancher named Jonah McBride arrived at her cabin, carrying a feverish little girl in his arms. His plea was simple. Can we stay one night? What would you do if a stranger knocked at your door, asking for shelter, yet bringing danger with him? Evelyn Hart lowered her rifle and lifted the lantern higher, though its glow seemed no match for the blizzard clawing at her cabin. The winter of 1878 had descended on Wyoming with a vengeance, burying the ridges of the Ironwood Peaks beneath drifts that could swallow a man whole. A pause, then one more. Evelyn froze, lantern trembling in her hand. No one braved this ridge in such weather, not in summer, and certainly not tonight. That pattern wasn't random. It wasn't an answer to her shot. It meant something else. She set the lantern aside and gripped the empty rifle. Useless without powder, yet its weight steadied her as she crossed the single-room cabin, shadows from the fire stretching long across the walls. "Who's out there?" she called. No answer. Just another knock. Softer now, almost uncertain. Heart thundering. Evelyn unlatched the door a crack. Weapon raised. A giant of a man loomed before her, shoulders broad, chest bare despite the storm's fury. Snow melted in rivulets down a scar that cut from his collarbone to his ribs. His eyes were hollow with fatigue, but sharp, animal keen. In his arms was a small bundle. A child. A girl barely past her first year. Skin tinged blue-gray. Each breath a desperate rattle. "She's got pneumonia," the man rasped, voice raw with disuse. "I heard you can heal." Evelyn's gaze swept past him, searching the white void. "Who shot you?" His jaw tightened. "3 men. They're on my trail. By dawn. They'll find me." He looked her square in the eye. "I'll leave once the storm lets up. But she can't wait." The child coughed, wet and crackling. "Pneumonia. Yes, but something else too." Without another word, Evelyn opened the door wide. "Bring her in." He stooped beneath the frame, the storm seeming to push him inside. Evelyn barred the door, though she knew it would not hold against rifles. "What did you give her?" The man sank into a chair, his bulk making it creak. "Laudanum. It was all I had. You gave opium to a baby. She could have died. She was screaming with fever. If I hadn't silenced her, the men after us would have heard." His voice was steady, but his fists clenched on his knees. Evelyn bit back her anger. The child needed her now. She moved quickly, gathering willow bark for fever, pine needles for the lungs, something to purge the opium. Remedies handed down from her Cherokee mother before smallpox had taken her. "What's your name?" she asked without looking up. "Jonah McBride," he said after a pause. "And you, Evelyn Hart." She didn't glance at him, but she knew the name carried weight. As Evelyn loosened the damp dress, her fingers brushed something sewn into the lining, something hard, hidden. Evelyn's fingers paused as she worked the hidden object free. From the lining of the child's dress, she drew out a small packet wrapped in oilskin, folded tight against the weather. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a slip of parchment. The ink faded, but still legible. Her eyes widened. "You are a doctor," she whispered, holding up the certificate. It bore the seal of the University of Pennsylvania, dated 1861, Dr. Jonah McBride. The man did not flinch. His face was carved like granite, a soldier's mask. "I was a doctor once, during the war. Now I am only a man on the run." Evelyn's voice remained steady, though the words caught in her chest. On the run from what his gaze drifted toward the frost-streaked window. The snow pressed hard against the glass, as if the storm itself wanted to break inside. From the territorial prison, I was condemned for murder. The word lingered in the cabin's air, heavy as a gallows rope. Evelyn knew she ought to be afraid. She ought to reach for the rifle or the knife hidden beneath her cot. Yet she did not. The years she had spent as a nurse in field tents filled with wounded soldiers had taught her to listen first, judge later. She pressed her hand against Grace's chest, counting the shallow breaths. "Who did they say you killed?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "A woman and her child. But I swear to you, I tried to save them. Most men say they are innocent when the rope is waiting." His eyes shadowed and deep, locked onto hers. "Most men are running from something. I am running toward something. Believe me or don't. But please help my daughter." The word caught her attention. "Daughter. Grace is my wife's child, from before we wed, but she is mine in every way that matters." Evelyn gave a small nod. She knew the shape of families not built by blood alone. She set to work with practiced movements. She prepared a shallow basin of lukewarm water infused with herbs and bathed Grace's fevered body, then stirred together a thin syrup of willow bark sweetened with honey. As she worked, she spoke softly to the child, her voice gentle and steady, a habit carried from the battlefield. Evelyn coaxed the liquid past the child's lips, bit by bit, until half had gone down. Grace coughed weakly, a line of medicine dribbling down her chin, but she swallowed. "That's it," Evelyn murmured. "That's good, little one." The storm outside answered with a fury of its own. Wind screamed against the shutters, shaking them as though angry fists pounded to be let inside. The blizzard was worsening. No hunter, no matter how desperate, would push through the Ironwood Peaks tonight. "You should rest," Evelyn said, without looking up from Grace. "There's food in the pot if hunger gnaws at you." "I do not sleep while strangers watch," he said simply. Her eyes lifted to his. "Neither do I." For a heartbeat, something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "Then we understand one another?" She kept her focus on the child, aware of Jonah's eyes tracking her every motion. Grace's breaths were still shallow, but the dreadful blue hue at her lips had begun to soften toward pink. There would be no quick answer. The night would decide whether the child's strength would rise or fade. Jonah broke the silence. "Why did you fire that shot?" Before I knocked, Evelyn glanced toward the shuttered window. "The mare delivered. I sent word to Silver Creek Ranch that she lived." "It was a signal." His brow furrowed. "You deliver foals as well as save children." "I deliver what needs delivering," she said quietly. "Foals, calves, babies, but not for everyday sickness. Would you seek healing from a face like this, if you had another choice?" Jonah studied her, his voice firm. "I have seen worse wounds on surgeons in war. The best among them carried scars of their own." Evelyn had no answer. Instead, she crossed the cabin and opened a worn trunk beneath the narrow window. From it, she drew a leather-bound journal, the edges soft with age and handling. "My mother's remedies," she explained, settling back at Grace's side. "She was Cherokee. Your parents gone?" She answered without pause. 8 years now. Smallpox. My father died first. Then my mother tending him. I barely lived." She spoke as if reciting a ledger, her voice flat. "I was engaged then to marry Robert Thatcher, son of Reverend Thatcher. He came to see me when the fever passed and saw what was left of my face." Her fingers brushed the scars again. "He did not return." "I'm sorry," Jonah said. "Do not be. He revealed his truth before I bound myself to him, and the town revealed theirs." She closed the journal. Jonah's eyes narrowed. Thatcher? Is that his name? Evelyn looked up sharply. Robert Thatcher. His father preaches in Ashford Hollow. His brother, Burke Thatcher, runs half the cattle in these hills. The storm rattled the cabin once more, but it was not the wind that chilled Evelyn then. It was the shadow of old names carried on the blizzard's breath. Evelyn's brow furrowed as her hand stilled above the child's cot. How do you know that name? She asked softly. Jonah's voice grew hard, carrying the weight of years. James Thatcher. He was the one who swore against me, the only witness they ever had. A chill swept over Evelyn, sharper than the draft slipping through the chinks in her cabin walls. James Thatcher claimed you murdered a woman and her child, a native woman, and her half-blood husband. Jonah's fists clenched on his knees. His voice was steady, though his jaw tightened with each word. Willow Sky and John Red Elk. They came to me when their little one was stricken with fever. I did everything I could, but a week later, John was shot dead. They said it was trespassing on Thatcher land. Soon after, Willow Sky and her child vanished. Evelyn's breath caught. Willow Sky, from the Red Elk people. He nodded slowly. You knew her. My mother's cousin married into that family. They came through here once, years ago, when I was just a girl. Her throat tightened as memory and present blurred. She hesitated, then said, James Thatcher swore he saw you take them into your surgery in Cheyenne, claimed they never came out, said you buried their bodies behind your home. Jonah's gaze drifted past her, staring at a place far away. They searched, found nothing, but his word was enough. I was a Union doctor in a town that still bled rebel pride. They were eager for a scapegoat. Evelyn studied him, her nurse's eyes trained from years of war. She had seen the guilty and the innocent, the brave and the cowards, the liars and the men who carried truth heavy as stones. Jonah McBride bore guilt. Yes, but it wasn't the cringing guilt of a killer. It was the burden of a man who carried losses too great to speak aloud. Why would Thatcher lie? She asked at last. Land, Jonah answered without pause. The Red Elk family had rights to a valley where a creek ran into the Laramie River. Rich grass, steady water, perfect cattle land. After Willow Sky and her daughter disappeared, that valley became Thatcher property overnight. Evelyn's hands tightened around the cup she held. The story was too familiar. James Thatcher built his fortune the same way here in Wyoming. Prime grazing land claimed after its owners suddenly disappeared or turned up dead under suspicious circumstances. Her voice dropped, heavy with memory. He wants my ridge, too. He's tried 3 times to buy me out. Says a woman alone shouldn't hold good ground. Jonah's eyes narrowed. What's so special about your land? She moved to the shelf beside the fire and drew down a cup of water, offering it to him. Taste. Jonah took a sip, and his brows lifted in surprise. Sweet, pure. There's a spring beneath this ridge, Evelyn explained. It feeds my cabin and the valley below. It never freezes, not even in the dead of winter. With it, Thatcher's cattle range would be worth twice what it is now. They shared a look, silent but knowing. They were both in the way of a powerful man, one with influence, money, and no conscience. A whimper drew Evelyn back to the bedside. Grace stirred, fever rising again. Evelyn pressed her palm gently to the child's brow. What is it? Evelyn traced the birthmark with a fingertip. This mark. My mother had the same one. She said it ran through the women in her family. Jonah leaned close, frowning. Elizabeth, my wife, said it came from Grace's father. A family trait. Evelyn's heart pounded. Your wife, what was her name before she wed you? Elizabeth Rivers, Jonah said, watching her carefully. Why my mother's cousin, the one who married into the Red Elk family. Her name was River Woman. The census men forced them to change it when they wrote their records. Her voice sharpened, urgent. When was Grace born? 2 years ago. April. And Willow Sky's daughter. How old was she when she came to you? Jonah's eyes widened slightly as he followed her thought. 3. Maybe 4. Relief and disappointment mingled in Evelyn's chest. Then it wasn't the same child. No, Jonah agreed softly. But the likeness is strange. Evelyn forced her mind back to the moment, to the work of fighting fever and keeping Grace alive. Jonah fetched wood when the fire faltered, brought fresh cloths, and held Grace upright when Evelyn gave her more medicine. Evelyn noted the surety in his hands, the way he checked her pulse, supported her head, measured each breath. He had been a physician once. That much could not be denied. Near midnight, at last, Grace's fever broke. The heat ebbed from her skin, her breathing eased, and the awful rasp gave way to something steadier. She sank into deeper rest, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that promised survival. Evelyn sagged back, weary but relieved. And so should we. You can take the bed. I'll make do here in the chair. Jonah shook his head, his dark eyes steady. I told you before, I don't sleep when others are near. For the first time, Evelyn truly studied him. He always kept his back to a wall, his gaze alert even when the room was still. That watchfulness wasn't new. It was the instinct of a man who had lived too long on the edge of danger. How long were you locked away? She asked, her voice low. 14 months, he replied without hesitation. His words carried no self-pity, only the weight of fact. They meant to hang me last week. I slipped free during transfer. Her heart clenched. And Grace. Where was she all that time? Jonah's face tightened with grief that cut deeper than any scar. With Elizabeth, my wife. She died 3 months ago. Childbirth. The baby didn't survive either. Grace was left with her sister until I could reach her after I escaped. Evelyn lowered her eyes, letting silence fill the space. I'm sorry, she whispered. He gave a single nod, accepting the sympathy without comment, then pushed himself up and moved to the frost-glazed window. He peered through a narrow crack, watching the storm's rage lessen. The wind's dying down. Morning will be here soon, and with it, the men hunting me. His certainty chilled her more than the storm had. Bounty hunters, he added, his voice flat. 500 for my capture. More if I'm delivered dead. Saves the trouble of a trial. Evelyn studied him in the wavering firelight, a man marked by loss, hunted like an outlaw, yet carrying a child through a blizzard bare-chested. She found herself asking the question that had lingered unspoken. Why come to me? There are doctors in Ashford Hollow, men with offices and clean hands. He turned from the window, his gaze steady on hers. Because I'd heard stories about a woman healer up in the Ironwood Peaks, someone who helped when no one else would. She had built her solitude on that truth that most folk in Ashford Hollow saw only her scars, her mixed blood, the whispered tales that branded her witch. She had learned to turn their fear into distance, into power, but the sting had never left. Rest, she said again, her voice softer. I'll keep watch. Over Grace and the door. This time Jonah inclined his head. He moved to the hearth and settled onto the floor, his back against the warm stone. Moonlight broke through thinning clouds, spilling silver across the snow. Evelyn tended the child, checking her fever, then let her gaze linger, her breath caught. Her mother had called it the moon's touch, a blessing said to mark certain women in their family for generations. The pages, softened by years of handling, held records her mother had kept in careful script births, marriages, deaths. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Morning Star, the name the white men would translate into Morning Dove. She turned further, searching for more. And there, written in the same hand, a note dated 1871. Morning Star's daughter born named Grace after my mother. Her hands trembled. She looked from the record to the small girl sleeping soundly under her care. Grace born 1871. But Jonah had sworn this Grace was only 2, born to Elizabeth in 1876. Was he lying? Evelyn bent over the child, gently opening her mouth to check her teeth. They were still new, small, the set of a toddler, not a 7-year-old. The body told the truth. She was not the Grace of her family record, and yet the birthmark, the unmistakable crescent that had appeared in their line again and again. The storm had quieted by the time dawn brushed faint gold across the horizon. Jonah stirred awake like a man trained by hardship, instantly alert. Evelyn was waiting for him, her mother's journal open on the table and fresh coffee steaming between them. Your Grace isn't Willow Sky's child, she said without hesitation. But I believe Willow Sky Morning Star was kin to me. Jonah accepted the cup she offered, his gaze locked on hers. What are you telling me? She was my mother's cousin's daughter, Evelyn explained, tapping the journal. She bore a child named Grace in 1871. That Grace is not this one, but the birthmark your girl carries. It runs through my family's bloodline. Jonah frowned, lines deepening across his brow. Elizabeth never spoke of native blood. Many don't, Evelyn replied gently, especially when they can pass for white. Jonah set down the cup, his hands unsteady for the first time since she had met him. Elizabeth was a nurse. That's where we met during the war. She never spoke of her kin. Grace's breathing was steady, her cheeks touched with the faintest color now that the fever had broken. His eyes lingered on the faint crescent-shaped mark at her neck. She said it came from Grace's father, he murmured, his voice rough. Perhaps it did. Or maybe Elizabeth carried native blood herself. Evelyn closed her mother's journal with deliberate care. Either way, the tie is there, too close to ignore. And Evelyn, through her mother's kin, was bound to them as well. Jonah broke the silence first. What does that mean for us? Evelyn steadied her breath. It means we have to learn what truly happened to Willow Sky and her little girl. And it means those men riding after you aren't chasing only a bounty. They're guarding someone's secrets. She met his eyes. James Thatcher's secrets. Jonah nodded slowly, his jaw hardening. Someplace far, beyond Thatcher's reach. Wait. Evelyn stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Her voice rang with an edge he hadn't heard before. Running won't fix this. If Thatcher framed you once, he'll keep chasing you till you're gone. And he won't stop with you. He'll hunt Grace, too. Jonah's shoulders stiffened. What choice do I have? Surrender myself, I'd be swinging from a rope before I ever spoke a word. Evelyn lifted her chin, her resolve hard as the mountains themselves. Then we don't hide. We face him. We go into Ashford Hollow together and find proof of what Thatcher did. He stared at her as though she'd lost her senses. That's suicide. It's the only way to end this, she said firmly. I've lived years on this mountain, letting folks' fear keep me apart, telling myself solitude was safety, But I'm tired of letting men like Thatcher take whatever they please. This time, someone has to stand. Through the frosted window, dawn spilled over the Ironwood Peaks, painting the snowfields with rose and gold. The storm had passed, leaving the world crisp, fragile, and startlingly beautiful. Evelyn watched as a raven rose from a pine branch, black wings sharp against the pale sky. Her mother would have called it a sign. "They'll come for you soon," she said without turning. "We can wait here like prey, or we can choose the ground we'll stand on." For a long time, Jonah was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new steadiness. "You'd risk yourself for us." Why she turned then, her scarred face set with quiet conviction. Because Willow Sky was kin, because Grace bears my family's blood, because Thatcher has stolen enough, and because I'm done living in shadows. Grace stirred faintly, her lashes fluttering, but she did not wake. The child lay between them, the fragile thread binding together a scarred mountain healer and a hunted doctor. Outcasts, yes, but survivors too. Jonah's voice dropped. "What do you propose?" Evelyn's eyes sparked with purpose. "First, we speak with someone who might believe us. Esther Caldwell, the widow down at Silver Creek Ranch. She's the only one in Ashford Hollow who still treats me like a person. After that—" Evelyn's mouth set in a grim line. "We find proof. If Thatcher buried Willow Sky and her husband, then their bones are still out there. We'll uncover them." Jonah's brow shadowed. "If they exist, they exist," Evelyn said with certainty. "Thatcher would never have left them alive, and he's arrogant enough to believe no one would ever dig too deep." She crossed the room, pulling a plain but sturdy dress from a trunk. Her movements were brisk, decided. "We have a few hours before the trails open fully. They're here sooner than I thought." Evelyn joined him, peering into the valley below. Against the white expanse, 3 riders appeared, tiny dark figures moving steadily upward, flanked by the bounding shapes of dogs. "Bounty hunters," Jonah said grimly. "They'll reach us within the hour." Her mind raced. Grace was still weak, their plan half-formed. But waiting meant giving up any chance to move first. "Change of plans," Evelyn said sharply, already reaching for her satchel. "We leave now. The North Trail, steep, but hidden. We can reach Silver Creek Ranch before they cut us off." Jonah nodded without hesitation. He bent over the child, lifting her with careful strength, wrapping her in the thickest quilt Evelyn owned. Grace stirred, but did not wake, safe in his arms. Evelyn dressed quickly, layering wool and leather against the brutal cold. She packed herbs, dried food, her mother's journal, and a few keepsakes she could not abandon. Last of all, she took down the rifle that hung above her door and loaded it with practiced ease. Jonah's eyes followed her. "You know how to handle that." She met his look with a steady one of her own. She'd survived years alone in the Ironwood Peaks. A rifle was no stranger to her hands. They stepped outside into the blinding brilliance of morning. The snow, waist-deep in places, glittered like crushed glass beneath the sun. Evelyn stroked the mare's muzzle apologetically. "We can't take her, not with her foal so new. But we'll need my gelding." The sturdy mountain horse whickered as she entered his stall, already pawing at the straw as if eager for the trail ahead. "You hold Grace low against my back." Jonah hesitated only long enough to adjust the blanket around the child before handing Grace up. Evelyn settled the girl carefully against her chest. "It winds down to the old mining road. From there, we can reach Silver Creek Ranch without being spotted from the main path." Jonah's arm tightened around her waist as he steadied Grace between them. His voice dropped low, close to her ear. "Evelyn, if this turns bad, it won't." She cut him off. Then, softer but steady. "But if it does, we face it together." She turned just enough to catch his eyes. "I'm through hiding. Jonah McBride." He gave a single nod. Evelyn turned forward and urged the gelding into motion. The horse broke into a trot, hooves crunching through snow. Behind them, the baying of hounds carried up the valley. Closer, more urgent. The hunters had their scent. As the cabin vanished behind a veil of trees, Evelyn risked one last look over her shoulder. Smoke still curled from the chimney, a signal to guide their pursuers straight to her door. For years, that cabin had been her refuge. Now, it was nothing more than a trap. Let them come, she thought fiercely. The scarred witch of the mountain was done with running. The gelding moved faster as they entered the tree line. Evelyn bent low over his neck, one hand gripping the reins, the other securing Grace. Jonah rode close, his breathing steady despite the danger. Together, they cut through the snowbound forest, racing against the morning sun. Behind them, the hounds reached the cabin. Their baying rose, triumphant, only to falter when they found nothing but emptiness. The chase was fully on now, but for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart was not prey. She was the hunter, too. Snow sprayed up in glittering arcs as the gelding pressed forward, muscles bunching and stretching with each stride. Evelyn kept the pace fast enough to gain distance, but careful enough for the treacherous trail. Grace stirred, her tiny whimpers muffled against Evelyn's coat. "She needs rest," Jonah murmured, his voice rough with worry. "And warmth. Silver Creek is less than an hour ahead." Evelyn answered without slowing. "Esther will help us." They rode in silence then, each locked inside their own thoughts. The forest was hushed in the storm's wake, broken only by the creak of leather and the horse's labored breath. Twice. Evelyn stopped, tilting her head to listen. The first time, the hound still howled from the ridge above. The second, only silence stretched through the trees. "They'll find the trail where it opens," Jonah said grimly. "But they know we're heading down mountain. We've bought a little time, no more. Then we use it well." Evelyn replied. The sun climbed higher, blazing against the snow until the world was dazzling white. By mid-morning, they reached the old mining road, long abandoned but still open. Other tracks dotted the snow deer. Wolf, perhaps a solitary traveler. Evelyn guided the gelding east. "Silver Creek lies just beyond that rise," she said, nodding toward a sunlit slope. When they crested the hill, the valley spread before them. Silver Creek Ranch stood sturdy against the foothills, its outbuildings clustered together, smoke curling from chimneys. In the nearest pasture, cattle huddled tight against the cold. Jonah stiffened behind her. "Open ground," he muttered, "too exposed." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "We've no choice. Esther Caldwell is the only ally we might find in Ashford Hollow." The gelding quickened his pace as the snow thinned. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was bright above them. On the wide porch of the main house, a tall woman stepped out. Her silver hair was drawn into a severe bun, her shawl wrapped tightly against the cold. Esther Caldwell shaded her eyes, peering across the yard. Recognition dawned in her face. "Evelyn Hart," she called, her voice strong despite the years. "Is that you?" Child Evelyn lifted one hand in greeting as she slowed the horse. "Mrs.?" Her eyes widened. "The escaped prisoner." She breathed. "The whole town's been talking. They say he murdered a woman and child." Jonah stiffened, his hand twitching toward his coat. But before he could speak, Evelyn dismounted, cradling Grace close. Her voice cut firm across the yard. "He's innocent, Mrs. Caldwell, framed by James Thatcher." She adjusted the blanket around Grace so the older woman could see the child's pale face. "This is his daughter. She has pneumonia. We need shelter, just a few hours' rest." Esther Caldwell's lined face revealed the tug-of-war between instinct and compassion. It wasn't a question, but a statement, the one from Cheyenne. Jonah inclined his head, voice steady. "Yes, ma'am." Esther's gaze turned to Evelyn. "And you trust him?" "I do," Evelyn answered without hesitation. The older woman exhaled slowly, then gave a firm nod. "That settles it. If Evelyn Hart places her trust in a man, I'll do no less. Lord knows, she doesn't hand it out lightly. Come inside quickly. My boys are out checking fence lines. They'll be back before long." They followed her through the wide doorway into the warmth of the ranch house. The interior spoke of solid work and simple prosperity. "Lay the little one here," she instructed. "I'll fetch blankets." Evelyn placed Grace down gently, brushing damp strands of hair from her fevered forehead. The child stirred, but didn't wake. Her breathing, though shallow, was easier than it had been up in the cabin. "She'll need willow bark for the fever," Evelyn murmured. "And honey, if you have it, for her throat." "I've both," Esther replied briskly, returning with blankets and a kettle of steaming water. She covered Grace carefully, then turned to Jonah with a pointed look. "Young man, I've a shirt of my husband's upstairs. You'll catch your death dressed as you are." Despite the danger pressing at their heels, Evelyn nearly smiled. Esther Caldwell was not a woman to be rattled. He stood silently, scanning the yard like a sentry. Then his shoulders stiffened. "Riders," he said quietly. "3 of them, and hounds." Evelyn's stomach dropped. The bounty hunters. Esther joined him at the window, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Not just any hunters," she said grimly. "That's Silas Webb and his brothers, men who'll do anything for Thatcher's coin." Jonah's jaw clenched. "James Thatcher sent them. He won't rest until I'm silenced. He knows what I discovered about Willow Sky and her family." Esther's hand flew to her chest. "Willow Sky, the native woman who vanished near Cheyenne?" She sank into a chair, shaking her head. "I knew there was foul play in that story." "You've heard of her?" Evelyn asked. "My sister wrote from Cheyenne when it happened. Said the woman and her child disappeared right after her husband was gunned down. Folks pointed fingers at a Union doctor, but no body, no evidence. Never did sit right with me." The thunder of hooves outside cut their conversation short. Through the window, Evelyn saw the Webbs rein in their horses at the ranch yard. Silas dismounted, tall and lean, his face weathered like old leather. His brothers held back the straining hounds. "Both of you, back in the bedroom," Esther commanded sharply. "Take the child. I'll deal with Webb." "Mrs. Caldwell," Evelyn began, but Esther cut her off with a raised hand. "I buried one husband after Antietam and the other after a raid on this very land. I've stared down worse than Silas Webb. Go." There was no arguing with her. Evelyn scooped Grace into her arms, and Jonah opened the window silently. Beyond the sill lay a stack of firewood, for cover, and farther still, the wide stretch of pasture. Too much open ground. Their chances of escape were thin. From the front of the house, a heavy knock rattled the door. Esther's voice carried through the walls, calm and firm. "Mr. Webb, what brings you to my porch on a day like this tracking a fugitive?" came the gravelly reply. Escaped doctor. Accused of murder. Word is he's traveling with a woman. You seen anyone pass this way? Can't say that I have, Esther answered smoothly. My boys are out riding. If strangers had come near, they'd have told me. We'd best take a look, Webb said. Dogs'll find what eyes might miss. I won't have hounds near my hens, Esther snapped. Lost 3 already to wolves last month. In the bedroom. Jonah tested the window latch. We need to go. Now. Evelyn gathered Grace close. The child whimpered faintly, but did not wake. They could hear boots crunching in the snow outside as Webb's brothers moved toward the barns. One of the hounds bayed, catching scent. Then Webb's voice cut clear across the yard. Jonah McBride, we know you're in there. Step out quiet, and maybe the woman and the child walk away. Jonah's expression hardened. I'll draw them off. You and Grace know. Evelyn interrupted fiercely, gripping his arm. We stay together. The hounds barked louder, nearer now, and boots thudded on the porch. They were out of time. Evelyn pressed Grace into Jonah's arms and stepped to the bedroom door. She walked into the main room just as Silas Webb pushed 1 foot over the threshold, towering above Esther. You're looking for me, Evelyn said, her voice steady as iron. She stood tall, scars catching the firelight, refusing to flinch. I helped Jonah McBride escape. For a heartbeat, Webb simply stared at her, surprise flickering into recognition. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. You, he drawled. I sent him west before dawn with fresh horses. Silas Webb's eyes narrowed, suspicion cutting through his rough features. You're lying. And my Evelyn's mouth curved into a thin, deliberate smile. Ask your hounds. The hunters might believe they had overshot their quarry. Webb hesitated, doubt flickering across his hardened face. Search the house, he barked to his brother at the door. Now just a minute, Esther Caldwell said sharply, planting herself squarely in the way. I've tolerated your questions, Mr. Webb, but I'll not have armed men stomping through my home without cause. The cause is $500. Webb shot back coldly. Dead or alive, and harboring a fugitive earns a rope, even for a respectable widow. One of his younger brothers shoved past Evelyn, heading toward the back room where Grace slept. Evelyn's pulse hammered, though her expression remained unreadable. She had bought them seconds, maybe less. Then a crash outside shattered the standoff. Everyone turned as the third Webb brother crumpled into the snow beside the barn, as if struck from nowhere. Webb clawed at the iron grip, his eyes bulging before he went limp. Jonah lowered him carefully to the floor. Alive, Jonah said quickly, meeting Esther's wide, shocked eyes. Just unconscious. Where's the other one? Evelyn asked. The answer came in the sharp click of a pistol being cocked. The youngest Webb stood framed in the bedroom doorway, gun leveled at Jonah's chest. Don't move, he snarled, or I'll put you in the ground. Doctor. Evelyn was behind him, close enough to see the tremble in his trigger finger. She acted without thought. Snatching the heavy cast-iron pan from the stove, she swung it with all her strength. The skillet connected with a sickening thud, and the man dropped wordlessly, his gun firing into the floorboards. The echo rang through the house. Grace stirred in the other room, but did not cry out. Silence followed, broken only by the dogs barking outside. Merciful heavens, Esther whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. At my age, harboring fugitives and striking bounty hunters, Grace Evelyn asked quickly. Still sleeping, Jonah answered. Didn't even stir at the shot. He scanned the unconscious men. We can't stay. More will come when these don't return." Esther's resolve returned in an instant. "Then you'll need supplies and a wagon. No horse can carry you far with a sick child." She went to a cabinet and pulled out a leather pouch that jingled with coins. "Mrs. Caldwell." "We can't," Evelyn began. "You can, and you will." Esther cut her off firmly. Grace was bundled in quilts, her small face pale but peaceful in sleep. "By then, you'll be far down the road, and whatever tale those men spin won't matter." She gripped Evelyn's hands tightly. "Head for Miller's Crossing. My cousin Isaac runs the store there. Tell him I sent you. He'll know what to do." Emotion welled in Evelyn's throat as she embraced the older woman. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my mare and foal," Esther said softly. "We're square. Just be careful. James Thatcher's reach is long." Jonah climbed onto the driver's bench, pulling Evelyn up beside him. Grace nestled between them, wrapped in warmth. The wagon creaked into motion. Yet Evelyn knew this wasn't running. This was only gathering strength before the storm to come. The journey to Miller's Crossing tested them at every mile. Twice, they stopped to clear heavy branches that blocked the road. Once, the wagon sank into a snowdrift, forcing both Evelyn and Jonah to dig it free with their bare hands. Grace stirred restlessly, fever returning in waves. At one stop, she whimpered through cracked lips, calling for someone named Mama Dove. Evelyn pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. "She's remembering," she murmured. "Somewhere deep. She knows Willow Sky." Jonah's face tightened. "Elizabeth told me Grace's mother died when she was an infant. That's why her father gave her up." "Perhaps that's what she believed," Evelyn said softly. "Or perhaps the truth was hidden for reasons we don't yet understand." As the day waned, the sun sank behind Ironwood Peaks, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The cold grew sharper, the air biting at their skin. Evelyn found herself pressed close to Jonah. Grace bundled safely between them for warmth. After a long silence, Evelyn spoke, her voice low. "Tell me about your wife." Jonah's hands tightened on the reins, his jaw hard. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then he exhaled slowly. "Elizabeth was a nurse during the war," he said. "We met at Antietam." Jonah's voice was quiet, almost reverent, as though he were speaking to someone long gone. "She had the steadiest hands I ever saw. When everything around us was chaos shouting, cannon fire, men screaming, Elizabeth never faltered. After the war, we went west. We wanted a place untouched by battlefields. I opened a small practice in Cheyenne, and she became my right hand. Elizabeth couldn't bear children. The infection she caught tending soldiers left her unable. Grace came to us when she was barely walking. Her father had been a cavalry officer, killed in a skirmish with the Sioux. Her mother died giving birth. Or that's what we were told. Official adoption wasn't really possible for a mixed-blood child back then. It was more about who had the courage to take her in. His eyes softened as he glanced down at the little girl nestled in quilts between them. Elizabeth loved her from the first moment. 2 years ago, middle of summer, she brought her daughter to me, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with a high fever. Willow Sky was frightened not only for her child's life, but of being seen. She made me promise silence. Did she recognize Grace? Evelyn pressed. "No," Jonah said. "Grace was with Elizabeth that day. Willow's daughter was named Sarah. I treated her, and then they slipped away as quietly as they came." A shadow passed over his face. A week later, Willow's husband, John Red Elk, was found shot on Thatcher's land. After that, they vanished. Evelyn finished the thought for him. And 2 months later, Thatcher accused you. Jonah nodded grimly. He swore he saw them enter my surgery and never leave. Claimed I killed them to cover some scheme. They tore up my land, dug through my garden, searched every inch. They found nothing. Of course, but Thatcher's word carried weight. That was enough to damn me. Evelyn pieced the timeline together in silence. And Elizabeth? She asked quietly. Jonah's voice hollowed. At home with Grace. She was pregnant then, our first. She believed in me with every breath she had. She fought for me when the trial began. But when the sentence came down, he swallowed hard. Something inside her broke. She went into labor early. The baby, our boy, was stillborn. And Elizabeth, she never recovered. Evelyn laid her hand over his where it gripped the reins. I'm sorry. The wagon rolled on without words, the weight of their losses pressing down heavier than the snow-laden sky. The winter sun bled into the horizon, casting the world in strokes of gold and rose. By nightfall, they reached Miller's Crossing. The settlement was little more than a scattering of wooden buildings clustered around a narrow creek. Let me speak to Isaac first. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. The smell of coffee, leather, and pipe smoke hung in the warm air. Behind the counter, a tall man with wire-rimmed spectacles was tallying accounts. We're closed for the night, ma'am, he began, then looked up fully. His gaze lingered on her scarred face. Do I know you? My name is Evelyn Hart, she said firmly. Esther Caldwell is your cousin. She told me you might help us. Isaac Miller studied her for a long moment, then adjusted his glasses. Esther sent you from Silver Creek, yes? We ran into trouble earlier today. Evelyn hesitated, then added, There are 3 of us. Myself, a man, and a child who's very ill. We need warmth, shelter, and discretion. Isaac's face gave nothing away. He polished his lenses against his vest. Would this trouble have anything to do with the telegram I received not 4 hours ago? The one warning about an escaped murderer and the woman helping him. Evelyn's heart sank. So the lines are working again. They are, he said evenly. $50 for information leading to capture. Evelyn straightened. Then we'll trouble you no further. She turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her. Miss Hart, he said, setting aside his ledger. You haven't let me finish. Esther Caldwell saved my boy's life during the diphtheria outbreak back in '69. If she sent you to me, there's a reason. He stepped out from behind the counter. Bring your companions around to the back. My wife will have supper waiting. Relief washed over Evelyn like a wave. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Isaac warned, his voice low. Sheltering fugitives puts my family at risk. I need to know the truth of what I'm protecting. You'll know everything, Evelyn promised. But first, Grace needs warmth. She has pneumonia. An hour later, the 3 of them were gathered in the Miller's cozy kitchen. Evelyn recounted their story in detail: Jonah's wrongful conviction, their flight through Ironwood Peaks, the link to Willow Sky, Thatcher's schemes. Isaac leaned against the table, listening with grave attention. At last, he rubbed his jaw. Thatcher, he said slowly. James Thatcher, the cattle baron. Jonah nodded once, his expression like stone. You know the kind of man he is, Isaac said at last, his face shadowed with concern. Thatcher's reach stretches further than folks care to admit. He even bought up the lumber mill here in Miller's Crossing last fall. Same as what he tried on my land. Isaac nodded slowly. Most likely. He removed his glasses and rubbed them with a kerchief, a nervous habit that betrayed more than his calm words. Then he looked squarely at Jonah. "What you're suggesting that Thatcher murdered Willow Sky and her husband, then laid the blame at your feet. That's no small claim." "Do you have proof?" Jonah shook his head. "Not yet, but the truth is buried somewhere. If we don't bring it to light, Thatcher will keep winning. What you need," Isaac said carefully, "is those bodies if they're out there." "They're out there," Evelyn said firmly. She leaned down, pulling her mother's worn journal from her satchel and laying it open on the table. "There's a man who might know where. Samuel Carter. He was close to my father once, before Thatcher hired him for his hunts. Carter knows these hills better than anyone. If Willow Sky was killed on Thatcher's land, I'd wager Carter knows the place." Isaac leaned closer, tracing the route Evelyn sketched on the rough county map. "Carter's cabin here, near Bear Creek, 10 miles north of Ashford Hollow. Isolated country. Thatcher uses them now and then, but Carter's never been a man to answer to anyone." Jonah's jaw set. "Then that's where we go. At first light." His tone left no room for debate. Isaac exchanged a quiet look with his wife. "Sarah." Something unspoken passed between them before he finally nodded. "You'll have food and a warm bed tonight, but be careful. Thatcher's influence is wider than you think." The fire had burned down to glowing embers, filling the room with soft light. His gaze stayed locked on the hearth. "Why are you doing this?" he asked suddenly. His voice was low, almost raw. "Why risk everything for us?" Evelyn considered his question for a long while. At first, she told herself it was only blood ties, that Willow Sky had been her cousin, that she owed it to her mother's kin. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. She set the cup aside, her scarred face lit by the glow. At first it was family, she admitted, but now it's justice. Men like Thatcher take and take land, lives, dignity, and no one stops them. My mother's people lost everything that way. And her fingers brushed the scars on her cheek, I lost my place in the world. You never lost your place, Jonah said quietly. His eyes found hers, steady and sure. The world lost the right to claim you. The words startled her with their quiet poetry. If your name is cleared, he stared into the embers. I'll take Grace someplace safe. Start fresh again. Seems like all I've done is start over. He gave a humorless half smile. Maybe Oregon. Maybe California. I don't know yet. His eyes flicked back to her. And you? Will you return to your cabin? Evelyn hadn't allowed herself to imagine that far ahead. I don't know, she said truthfully. I'm not sure I can go back to that silence. Not after. She trailed off, unable to finish. Not after remembering what it felt like to belong again. Jonah seemed to understand. He reached his hand across the worn table, stopping just short of hers. The space between them was no more than an inch, but it carried the weight of years of loneliness. Evelyn slowly, deliberately, shifted her fingers until they brushed his. We should rest, she whispered again, but neither moved. Snow began to fall outside, drifting past the frosted window panes, cloaking the world in white. She didn't dare name it, not yet, but she knew, as she finally rose to her feet, that no matter what tomorrow brought, she was already changed. Morning broke with brittle skies and biting air. The storm had cleared, leaving a brilliant, merciless cold. And if you find Carter, be cautious. The man's loyal to no one but himself. They set out at dawn. Grace, stronger after a night in a real bed, sat between them, bundled in blankets. Her solemn eyes followed the snow-laced trees as they rolled out of town. The wagon creaked north along the creek. then veered west into country few dared to travel. The forest thickened, pines and leafless aspens rising like watchful sentinels. Snow lay deep, unbroken since the storm. By midday, Evelyn lifted her hand toward the ridge ahead. "Carter's cabin lies just beyond that rise," she said. "Let me speak with him first. He won't take kindly to strangers." When they reached it, the place looked abandoned. The chimney was cold, the door shut tight. No tracks broke the snow around it. Jonah drew the reins, frowning. "If he's here, he doesn't want company." Evelyn studied the stillness, unease creeping into her chest, or something's already gone wrong. The cabin clung to the side of the hill like it had grown there, its gray timbers blending into the winter sky. Evelyn walked ahead of the wagon, her boots crunching in the snow. She lifted her voice. "Mr. Carter, it's Evelyn Hart, Joseph Hart's daughter." At first, nothing but the hush of wind through the pines answered her. She stepped closer to the single narrow window. "Samuel, are you here?" A shadow shifted inside. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, wiry man with a white beard and eyes the color of ice. He held a rifle loose in one hand, though the barrel rested low. "Joseph's girl," he rasped, voice rough as dry grass. "You're grown now," Evelyn let out the breath she'd been holding. "Yes, it's been many years." His gaze drifted past her, toward the wagon where Jonah sat with Grace. "You've brought company. Friends," Evelyn said evenly. "People who need help. May we come in? It's important." Carter studied her a long moment before giving a short nod. "Bring them. But the man leaves his weapons on the porch." Jonah didn't argue. He unbuckled his knife, set it beside the pistol they'd taken off one of Thatcher's men, then lifted Grace into his arms. They entered together. The inside of the cabin was warmer than expected, with pelts laid across the floor and hung on the walls. A neat stack of books sat on a shelf beside dried herbs and hunting gear. The hearth glowed faintly with coals, and Carter crouched to stir the fire back to life. "Samuel Carter tracked with my father before the war," Evelyn explained to Jonah. "He taught me to read trails when I was little. Best woodsman I ever knew." "Your father," Carter said, straightening from the hearth. "Except maybe your mother. She saw things in the forest no white man ever noticed." Then his sharp eyes landed on Jonah. "And you're the runaway doctor, the one blamed for killing Willow Sky and her child." Jonah stiffened, but met his gaze. "I didn't do it." "Course you didn't." Carter waved a hand at the chairs near the fire. "No doctor steady enough to save a man's leg after a bear tore through it would be fool enough to kill and leave bodies to be found. Sit down." Evelyn and Jonah exchanged a startled look before obeying. "You know about the case?" Evelyn asked quietly. "I know Thatcher," Carter said simply. "Known him near 20 years. I know what he's capable of." He crossed the room to a heavy trunk and pulled out a battered leather journal. "I know Thatcher ordered it done, and I know where they were buried." Jonah's voice was tight, nearly shaking. "You saw it." The old tracker's shoulders slumped. "From a distance. I was trailing elk near the North Range when the shots started. Saw Thatcher's hired men, the Ferguson brothers, with Willow Sky and a child. They hauled them to the old line shack. Heard more gunfire. Later, they carried out bodies wrapped in canvas." Jonah surged forward in his chair. "And you never reported it." To who Carter's pale eyes burned with sudden heat. "The Sheriff Thatcher bought the judge who eats at his table. I'd have been a dead man before sundown. So I kept my mouth shut." "You let an innocent man hang in their place," Evelyn said softly. Carter flinched, his weathered face bent under the weight of shame. "I did. God forgive me. He turned another page in his journal, but I kept notes. In the woods, before the bad men came, Jonah dropped to one knee in front of her. Grace, do you remember Willow Sky? The girl nodded solemnly. She held me when I was sick, like you do. She touched the side of her head. She had a mark like mine, behind her ear. She called me Little Star. Evelyn's breath caught, the crescent birthmark. Grace's words came faster, as though something inside her had broken open. She said my real mama was watching from the sky. Tears welled in her eyes. Then the loud noise hurt my ears. Mama Dove fell down. She didn't get up. Evelyn pulled the child into her arms, holding her close. It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe now. But Grace wasn't finished. She looked up at Jonah, her small face tight with memory. The lady in white took me away. She said I had to be quiet, or the bad men would hear. She brought me to Mama Elizabeth. Jonah's breath caught. Lady in white. Pretty lady. Sad eyes. Grace whispered. She touched her ear again. She had a mark like mine. Evelyn's gaze flew to Jonah's. Another woman with the same mark. Someone else brought her to Elizabeth after Willow Sky was killed. Evelyn murmured. Jonah swallowed hard. Elizabeth never told me. She always said Grace's parents were gone before she came to us. Carter cleared his throat. There's something else you ought to know. They looked at him sharply. The child with Willow Sky that day. It wasn't Grace. It was another girl. Older, 7, maybe 8. Jonah's brow furrowed. Sarah, he whispered. Willow Sky's daughter was named Sarah, Evelyn said quietly, the weight of realization pressing down on her chest. Carter gave a solemn nod. 2 children went into that shack. Only one small body came out. His face was pale, his voice low. My Elizabeth, who never once spoke of her kin, who kept no photographs or heirlooms, because her past was dangerous. Evelyn finished for him. If she was tied to Willow Sky's people, my mother's people, then Thatcher's campaign wasn't only about land. It was about erasing bloodlines. Jonah's hand curled into a fist. Then Elizabeth was hiding more than Grace. She was hiding herself. The room seemed smaller now, heavy with the enormity of what they were uncovering. This wasn't just greed, it was deliberate. Systematic destruction, murder, false accusations, and now the possibility of entire families being wiped away for daring to hold land with water rights. Carter's weathered eyes carried an old grief. Thatcher's been at this near 2 decades, buying out ranches, swallowing up streams and grazing land. And when native families stood in his way, they vanished. Your cousin Willow Sky, her husband, maybe even your own folks. My parents died of smallpox, Evelyn said automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. Did they? Carter asked. Gaze steady. Her breath caught. What do you mean? I mean Thatcher's men carry more than rifles, Carter said grimly. I've heard whispers of blankets passed to settlements that wouldn't sell. Blankets carrying sickness. Wouldn't surprise me if your father, who knew too much about land rights through your mother, was silenced the same way. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her. Evelyn pressed a hand against the rough wooden table, struggling to steady herself. No. Jonah's voice cut through the haze. Speculation won't clear my name. We need proof. Carter's face hardened. I can take you to the place where Willow Sky and that child are buried. But it's Thatcher's range. His riders sweep the land regular. You'll be risking more than prison. Evelyn lifted her chin, though her heart hammered. Now, before the snow sets in, "You're very brave," she told her gently, "and very important." Grace studied her face with eyes far older than her years. "Are you my family?" Like Mama Dove Evelyn's throat tightened. She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "Yes," she whispered, "I believe I am." The child nodded, as though that truth had already lived in her heart. "I knew it. You've got kind eyes, like hers." The wind outside was rising, carrying with it the faint sting of oncoming snow. Evelyn lifted Grace into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. Evelyn kept one arm wrapped around Grace. The other braced against the seat as they followed Carter's mule through narrow trails. The air grew heavier by the mile, the sky darkening until it seemed like dusk had arrived early. "They'll find what they're looking for," Evelyn thought grimly, "but they may find danger first." James Thatcher's power reached into every valley and ridge. His profile against the falling light was unreadable, determined, perhaps resigned. But Evelyn knew one thing: they were committed now. The land opened as they crested a ridge, revealing a vast sweep of Thatcher's empire. Miles of timber and grazing fields stretched into the horizon, broken by the silver glint of streams. To the unknowing eye was beautiful. The world around them was silent, but for the creak of wheels and the muffled crunch of hooves. Carter led them down old game trails, hidden paths that only years of hunting had taught him. His head turned often, nostrils flaring as though he could scent the storm. "It's moving quicker than I thought," he muttered when they paused to rest the team. 3 hours, maybe less. Evelyn followed his gaze westward. Dark clouds pressed low, heavy as an army massing for battle. The child's breath puffed warm against her coat. "How much farther to the shack?" Evelyn asked. Carter pointed toward a ridge, its outline barely visible through the pines. "Beyond there. Used to mark the boundary before Thatcher pushed his fences farther. Too many stories tied to it now. Too many ghosts." His mouth twisted in something between a grimace and a smile. "He doesn't use it anymore. But he's got riders. Always riders." Jonah checked the pistol they had taken from Webb, spinning the cylinder with grim efficiency. "And if they're there, then we'll know soon enough," Carter said, pulling his hat low against the biting wind. The wagon jolted back into motion. Snowflakes had begun to fall, soft at first, like ash drifting from some far-off fire. Evelyn pulled Grace closer, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Evelyn sat beside Grace, her eyes roaming the landscape in a way she never had before. What once seemed like a bleak backdrop of snow and pines now revealed itself as contested ground, every frozen creek and hidden spring carrying a weight of blood. The spring beneath her old cabin, the one that never froze even in the dead of winter, was not simply a blessing. It was power. His weathered hand cut through the air. The line shack. Evelyn's gaze followed his finger. A crude shelter squatted against the tree line, its sagging roof laden with snow. The rough logs were weather-beaten, the single window shuttered tight. No smoke curled from the chimney. It looked abandoned. It looked like a grave. Carter dismounted and moved ahead, his rifle resting easy in his grip, his eyes scanning for signs of recent activity. "So I've noticed," Carter returned, shaking his head. "No fresh tracks. Looks clear." He hesitated, then added, "For now." The door groaned open at Carter's push, revealing a single-room shelter barely 12 feet wide. Inside sat a battered table, a rusted stove, a cot with stuffing spilling through its rotten ticking. This is where Thatcher's men brought Willow Sky and her little girl. This is where they shot them. Evelyn's stomach twisted as the picture formed in her mind: a terrified mother, clutching her child, facing men who had already decided their fate. She pressed her lips together, forcing the image away. Behind the shack, there's a clearing where they dumped carcasses after hunts. Easier than digging proper graves. They used it for the bodies. He led them outside, his boots crunching on the snow. The clearing spread beyond the shack, bleak and colorless beneath the winter sky. Deadfall and thorn tangled along its edge, shadows stretching long. There, Carter pointed, his voice low. Under that fallen pine, I watched from the ridge that day. Jonah moved before the words had finished, long strides carrying him across the snow. Evelyn followed close, her pulse hammering in her ears. This was it, the proof that could finally clear Jonah's name and reveal Thatcher's hand in the killings. Carter pulled a small folding shovel from his pack and handed it over. Jonah took it without a word and drove it into the ground, breaking through the frozen crust with force born of fury. The earth resisted, iron hard, but he attacked it relentlessly. After several minutes, Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. "Let me," she said softly. "We'll take turns." They dug in shifts, scraping at the earth inch by inch. Grace remained bundled in the wagon. Calling out questions, Evelyn answered with gentle lies. The child did not need to see this. Above them, the sky darkened as clouds swallowed the light, and the wind began to carry the bite of snow. "Hurry," Carter urged, standing watch with his rifle ready. "Storm's nearly here." Jonah drove the shovel down again. This time, the blade struck with a dull thud. He froze, then dropped to his knees, clawing at the soil with bare hands. His breath came in sharp bursts as he brushed away the dirt. Canvas, weathered, fraying, yet unmistakable. The same material Carter had once described. "Evelyn," Jonah called, his voice taut. "I found something." She was there in an instant, kneeling beside him, helping to peel back the brittle fabric. Beneath lay a human skull, fragile and small. Evelyn's throat tightened as she whispered, "Willow sky." Next to it rested a smaller skeleton, the remains of a child no older than 7 or 8. Sarah. The bones told their story with awful clarity. Both skulls bore the unmistakable scars of bullets, executed without mercy. Evelyn crossed herself, a habit inherited from her father. "We need to document this," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Photographs, sketches, something that will hold in court." Jonah's face was pale, his jaw tight as stone. 2 bodies, just as Thatcher swore were missing. Proof enough to free me? His eyes lifted to Carter. "You're certain these are Willow Sky and her daughter?" "As sure as a man can be," Carter said. His voice weighted with shame. "I saw them carried out of the shack in canvas. Saw them laid right here." The question escaped Evelyn before she could swallow it. "Why didn't you stop them?" Carter flinched. His lined face sagged, shame cutting deeper than age. 2 of them, armed. I had nothing but my rifle and my cowardice. His voice dropped to a whisper. "God forgive me." Jonah rose slowly, brushing soil from his hands. His tone softened, though his eyes stayed hard. "You're making it right now. That counts for something." Evelyn wasn't sure she agreed, but the storm above them was closing fast, and time was slipping away. Her hands trembled, but her script was steady as she began to write the date, the place, the state of the remains. "Both were killed at close range," he said grimly. "Execution, plain and simple." "Thatcher's doing," Carter muttered, his jaw set. Maybe not his finger on the trigger, but his orders all the same. Evelyn kept her pen moving, though her throat felt tight. These were not strangers buried beneath the frozen ground. They were kin, cousins perhaps, tied to her through bloodlines and grief. Their deaths were pieces in the same cruel puzzle that had claimed her parents, framed Jonah, and now threatened Grace. Her eyes lifted suddenly. We need more. Something that ties these remains to Willow Sky and Sarah. Beyond doubt. Jonah shook his head softly. After all this time, Evelyn, there won't be much left to mark them. Not enough for a court, not enough to satisfy men bought and paid for by Thatcher. But Evelyn ignored his caution. She sifted carefully through the soil near the woman's neck. Her fingertips touched something hard. She brushed away the dirt and lifted a small pendant, silver tarnished with age, hanging from a strip of leather, a crescent moon. Her breath caught. The moon's touch, she whispered. My mother wore one just like it, a family piece. Carter leaned closer, his pale eyes widening. Yes, Willow Sky had that necklace. She never took it off. Not once. Evelyn cradled the pendant in her palm, a rush of certainty filling her chest. This is it. This proves who they were. Proof that Thatcher ordered their deaths. She placed the necklace inside her journal and closed it firmly. Before she could say more, Carter stiffened. His hand shot to his rifle. Riders, he hissed. Fast. They froze, listening. The distant rumble of hooves grew louder, beating against the frozen earth. 3, maybe 4, Carter said quickly. Coming from the south. Thatcher's ranch lies that way. They've spotted our trail, he added, already moving toward the cover of trees. Get to the wagon, Jonah barked, grabbing Evelyn's arm. We've got what we need. Forget the rest. We have Grace, she comes first. At her daughter's name. Evelyn hesitated no longer. But we're leaving now. Carter swung into his saddle, rifle across his lap. I'll hold them back. Head northeast. Follow the creek. There's an old mining camp. You can shelter there. Evelyn's heart clenched. We can't leave you. The old tracker met her eyes, something fierce and clear burning in his own. You must. This is my reckoning. Evelyn Hart. I stayed silent too long. Now I speak with my rifle. He pulled the lever back with a sharp click. Thatcher's men won't take me alive to keep me quiet. Jonah gripped Carter's arm for a brief moment. God be with you, old friend. Carter gave a wry smile. Been years since he listened to me, but maybe today he will. Then he spurred his mule up the ridge, planting himself squarely between them and the riders. Jonah cracked the reins, the wagon lurching into motion. They hadn't covered 50 yards when the first shots echoed, rolling across the frozen hills. Evelyn twisted in her seat against the storm-darkened sky. Carter stood tall in the saddle, rifle raised, a lone figure defiant against the oncoming riders. More gunfire lit the ridge, flashes of fire in the snow. Carter, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. Jonah drove the team harder, voice thick with grief. He bought us time. We can't waste it. The storm struck with sudden violence. Heavy flakes fell, a white curtain that swallowed the land. The wind howled, whipping through the pines, and the temperature dropped so sharply Evelyn's breath turned to ice. 1/2 mile. Follow the creek bed. Jonah nodded, his jaw tight, fighting the reins with every ounce of strength. The horses were near wild, spurred on by fear of both men and storm. How far past that stand of pines? Ghosts of another era, forgotten when the silver ran dry. There! Evelyn shouted, pointing. The assay office. As they reached the front, a gunshot cracked through the blizzard. The bullet buried itself in the wood inches from Jonah's head, splinters stinging his cheek. Inside he barked, yanking the reins to a halt. He leapt from the wagon, scooped Grace under one arm, caught Evelyn's hand with the other, and dragged them toward the door. More shots followed, muffled by the storm, but the snow shielded them, confusing their pursuers. They shoved through the warped doorway just as another round shattered a window above their heads. The interior of the assay office smelled of dust and damp timber. Shadows clung to the corners. Evelyn's sharp eyes caught the staircase in the back. "Upstairs," she urged. "We'll have a better view." Jonah nodded, with Grace clinging tightly to his neck. They climbed the groaning steps, their boots slipping on icy wood. The second floor was one open room, stripped bare except for a few broken chairs and a heavy oak desk. Jonah set Grace gently behind the desk. "Stay low, sweetheart." Evelyn crouched with her, stroking the child's hair as she pressed close. "Your father will keep us safe," she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. Below, muffled voices drifted through the storm. Harsh shouts. The hunters were spreading out, checking each building. Evelyn estimated 3, maybe 4 men, likely Thatcher's hired hands, perhaps even one of the Webbs who had escaped the last encounter. "They're circling us," Jonah muttered from the window. 2 in front, another heading toward the back. He checked their ammunition with clinical calm. 8 rounds in the rifle, 2 in the pistol. "Not enough," Evelyn said bluntly. Her mind raced. Buy time until the storm grows worse. Jonah's eyes flicked to her, skeptical. "These men don't bargain. Evelyn, they're not here to talk. They want you," she countered. "If you surrendered, maybe no." His answer was sharp, final. "Thatcher won't leave witnesses. Not you. Not Grace. Not me. We all die if I give in." Evelyn knew he was right. Thatcher's men would put them in the same kind of grave they'd just uncovered, unless she found another way. She crept to the opposite window and peered out. The storm had thickened into a white curtain. Visibility was only a few feet. The riders below moved like shadows in a snow globe, dark and blurred. Slowly, a thought formed. "The storm," she murmured. "It can work for us." Jonah glanced over. "How I know these mountains better than Thatcher's men. There's a valley east of here, sheltered from the worst of the wind. From there we can reach Ashford Hollow." Jonah's brow furrowed. "The same town that wants to string me up. The same town that will string Thatcher up once they see our evidence." She shot back. "The judge there is fair. If we can reach him, the necklace and my notes will speak louder than Thatcher's lies." He hesitated, calculating. 10 miles on foot in a blizzard, with Grace sick and weak. "Better than dying here," Evelyn answered simply. She knelt beside Grace. "Sweetheart, we need you to be very brave and very quiet. Can you do that?" Grace nodded solemnly. "Like Mama Willow told me when the bad men came." Evelyn's heart clenched at the child's words, but she forced a smile. "Yes, just like that." A fresh volley shattered another window. A man's voice bellowed through the storm. "McBride, we know you're up there. Come down. And it ends quick." Jonah crouched beside Evelyn. "Even if we slip out, they'll track us." "Not in this wind," she replied. "Our trail will vanish in minutes, and if they believe we're still here a distraction," Jonah finished, his eyes narrowing as the plan dawned on him. They shared a grim look. It was reckless, maybe impossible, but better than waiting for death. "What kind of distraction?" he asked. Evelyn scanned the room. Splintered chairs, broken planks, scraps of old paper. Her answer came quickly. "Fire. We start a blaze here. Make them think we're trapped. Then we slip down the back stairs." Jonah's face tightened, but he gave a single nod. It might work. The smoke will draw them like moths. Together they dragged the broken furniture into a pile against the far wall, away from their planned escape. Evelyn tore pages from her mother's journal, blank ones she had never used, and wadded them into kindling. Jonah struck flint and steel until sparks caught. Flames licked upward, first hesitant, then hungry. The old timbers crackled as the blaze took hold. The acrid smell filled the room. Heat pushed against their faces. Evelyn pulled Grace close, whispering assurances the child barely heard over the roar. Now, Jonah urged. They hurried down the back stairs, keeping low. The storm shrieked through the broken boards, masking their movements. She folded them into tight wads, setting them against the legs of splintered chairs. He gave a firm nod. Do it. Evelyn struck a match. The sulfur hissed to life, its tiny flame fragile against the howling storm seeping through the cracks. She pressed it to the paper. At once, the fire caught, crawling hungrily up the brittle wood. Smoke curled thick and acrid, spreading faster than she had anticipated. Now, she coughed, eyes watering. Backstairs. Keep low. Jonah led the way. Grace bundled in his arms, Evelyn following close with the rifle slung across her back. Shouts rang outside as Thatcher's riders caught sight of the glow. The place is burning. Someone yelled, "Circle around, don't let them out." But the storm was their shield. Snow swept through the camp in blinding sheets, swallowing the firelight as soon as it left the windows. The blizzard masked every sound but the wind's shriek. Evelyn shoved open the back door, and the three of them stepped into a white void. Immediately, the storm wrapped around them like a cloak. Within minutes, their tracks vanished behind them. Evelyn kept them moving, steering away from the obvious trail toward a narrow hunter's path. Only she knew. Behind them, the assay office was fully engulfed. Flames rose like a beacon, distorted by the snowstorm. Men shouted, their figures vague in the glow, searching but searching the wrong way. Evelyn forced herself not to look back again. They pressed deeper into the forest. Jonah carried Grace close, shielding her face against his chest from the icy sting of snowflakes. They collapsed together, huddling for warmth, sharing body heat. For a moment, silence held, broken only by the howl of wind. "Do you think they're still following?" Evelyn asked in a low voice. Jonah shook his head. "I don't hear anything but the storm." Grace whimpered softly, her tiny frame trembling even beneath the blankets. Evelyn pressed a hand to her forehead and felt the heat rising again. "The fever's worse," she said grimly. "She can't endure this long." Jonah's face hardened. "How far to Ashford Hollow?" 7 miles. Maybe 8 in this weather," she answered. She dug in her pocket and pulled out her small medical kit. "I've got willow bark. It may bring the fever down, but without real shelter, it won't be enough." They both knew what she left unspoken. Pneumonia killed quickly, especially children. Jonah's jaw set with determination. "We'll make it. We don't have a choice." Evelyn crushed the bark into her palms, mixed it with melting snow, and coaxed Grace to drink the bitter liquid. The girl grimaced, but swallowed without complaint. Evelyn kissed her forehead. "Brave girl," she murmured. After a brief rest, they pushed onward. The storm thickened, the world reduced to a tunnel of swirling white. Evelyn led them along the frozen creek bed that would eventually flow past Ashford Hollow. The path was treacherous, slick stones hidden beneath snow, and the ice itself too thin to trust. Then Jonah froze mid-step, his head turning sharply. Listen, he whispered. Evelyn strained her ears. Over the storm's howl came a faint, dreadful sound, the baying of hounds. Her stomach dropped. Thatcher sent dogs. They'll track us, even through this storm. Jonah's voice was grim. He must be desperate. He knows we carry proof that could ruin him. Evelyn's hand went instinctively to her pocket, where Willow Sky's necklace lay hidden beside her notes. We need to move faster. Ashford Hollow is our only hope. They staggered forward, urgency burning through their exhaustion. The dogs' cries grew louder, cutting through the blizzard. The creek widened as they descended, the terrain easier but leaving them more exposed. And then disaster struck. As Jonah stepped onto what looked like solid ice, it gave way beneath him. The crust shattered, and he plunged waist-deep into the freezing current. His reflexes saved Grace. He held her high above the water, but the shock nearly dragged him under. Jonah Evelyn screamed, scrambling back. He thrust Grace toward her, his arms trembling with effort. Take her, get her safe. Evelyn seized the child, setting her quickly on the snowy bank. She spun back to Jonah, who was clawing at the jagged ice, his movements already slowing as the freezing water leached his strength. Hold on, she shouted, dropping to her knees. She stretched out one arm, gripping his wrist with all her strength, while the other clutched at a root embedded in the bank. The icy current roared around him, trying to drag him away. Jonah's lips were pale, his breath ragged. Still, his eyes locked on hers, fierce with will. Jonah's face was pale, lips tinged blue, but his hand reached for hers. His fingers were slick and numb, almost slipping through her grasp, summoning every ounce of strength. She pulled while he pushed against the creek's stony bottom with his legs, inch by inch, agonizingly slow. His body broke free of the freezing current. Together, they collapsed onto the snowy bank, breathless and shaking. We got to get you warm, Evelyn said, already tugging at the buttons of his soaked coat. You'll die in minutes otherwise. Jonah's teeth rattled so violently he could barely form words. No. Time. Dogs. They're close. And he was right. The baying carried over the wind, louder than before, less than a mile now, perhaps even closer. But if she didn't act, Jonah wouldn't live long enough for the hounds to reach them. A cabin. Evelyn gasped as memory sparked. My father's hunting shelter, it's not far, less than half a mile. Jonah tried to push himself upright, swaying like a man about to break. Take Grace. Go. I'll follow. We stay together, Evelyn snapped, sliding her shoulder under his arm. Though his frame dwarfed hers, she braced her legs and bore his weight with grim determination. She turned to the child. Grace, sweetheart, can you walk a little while? I need both hands for your father. The girl's eyes were glassy with exhaustion. She nodded. I'll try. Step by step. The three of them moved as one through the whirling snow. Evelyn half carried Jonah, Grace trudging bravely beside them, her small boots sinking deep into the drifts. To Evelyn, it looked like salvation. They stumbled inside. The door sagged on its hinges but shut enough to block the wind. Grace crumpled onto the dirt floor, shivering. Evelyn dragged Jonah toward the wall, lowering him gently. Strip it off, she ordered, already fumbling at the stiff buttons of his shirt. He shook his head weakly, shame flickering across his eyes. Evelyn, this isn't about modesty. She cut him off. It's survival. Piece by piece. She peeled away the sodden fabric, her hands working furiously to rub warmth back into his limbs. His skin was cold as stone, but she refused to let panic rise. She had seen frostbite take men before. She would not let it take him. By some miracle, the cabin still held supplies. A stack of dry firewood leaned against one wall, brittle but usable. Old blankets, moth-eaten but intact, were folded atop a crude bed platform. Evelyn's hands shook as she built a fire in the hearth, striking flint until sparks caught on kindling. Flames licked upward, and soon heat seeped into the small room. She piled the blankets around Jonah, wrapping him tightly until only his face showed. Grace. She moved closer to the blaze, pulling another blanket over her small body. Only then did Evelyn hear the dogs again. This time their barks were frantic. Right outside, claws scraping against the door. "They've tracked us," she whispered, hollow with exhaustion. Jonah's eyes fluttered open, clearer now as warmth began returning. "You should take Grace and run." "I'll hold them here." "No." Her refusal was sharp, fierce. "We've come too far to split apart now." She checked her rifle. 3 bullets. She passed Jonah the pistol they'd taken off one of Thatcher's hired guns. 2 left. "Then we make them count," he rasped. Grace stirred at the sound of the dogs, her face pale in the firelight. Evelyn knelt beside her, smoothing tangled hair back from her forehead. "It's all right, little one. Try to rest. We'll keep you safe." The child's eyes lifted to hers, solemn and searching. "The bad men are coming again, like they came for Mama Willow." "Yes," Evelyn said softly, refusing to lie. "But this time we're ready." "Are you scared?" Grace asked, her voice so small it nearly broke Evelyn's heart. Evelyn hesitated. "Yes, but being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you stand your ground, even when fear tells you to run." Grace nodded, as though she understood more than her years allowed. Her little hand touched Evelyn's scarred cheek. "You're pretty, like Mama Willow." Tears stung Evelyn's eyes. She bent and pressed a kiss to Grace's warm brow. "Sleep, darling. We'll protect you." By the time the child's breathing steadied into shallow sleep, the dogs had worked themselves into a frenzy at the door. The wood shuddered beneath their paws as men's voices barked commands over the wind. McBride, a rough voice, bellowed, "We know you're in there. Come out now." Evelyn and Jonah exchanged a look, silent agreement passing between them. They would not surrender. Not now. Not with Grace's life on the line. Not with the necklace and notes that could expose Thatcher's crimes tucked safely in Evelyn's pocket. "This is your last chance." Another voice shouted, "Step out, or we burn you alive." Fury rose in Evelyn, hot and sharp. She strode to the door, lifting her voice so it carried over the storm. "Like you burned Willow Sky's husband, like you shot her and her daughter for their land." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Even the dogs quieted. Then a new voice cut through the night, deeper, colder. "You found the bodies?" Evelyn froze. Jonah's face went rigid. "Thatcher." He breathed. It was James Thatcher himself, the man who had orchestrated every cruelty, the one whose reach stretched from Silver Creek Ranch into every corner of 2 territories. And now he stood outside their fragile refuge. Evelyn's grip tightened on her rifle, her knuckles white. "We have proof," she called. "Your sins, your murders. They'll see the truth in Ashford Hollow. You can't bury it this time." Evelyn's voice was firm, carrying over the storm. Willow Sky's necklace, Carter's journal, and my own records of what we found. Your crimes are written in black and white. From outside came Thatcher's cold reply. "Carter is dead. Soon the rest of you will be as well." Who will believe the tales of a half-breed woman and a convicted murderer? No judge will listen. No governor will care. Judge Wilson will, Evelyn countered. And the territorial governor. And the newspapers in Denver and Cheyenne. You can't silence them all. A cruel laugh rang out. You think you'll live long enough to reach them? Let me give you a choice. Miss Hart, hand over McBride and the girl, and you can walk free with your so-called evidence. Let's see how far you get before the storm buries you. Go to hell. Thatcher, Evelyn shot back. His response was as sharp as a whip. You first. The night erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore through the thin walls of the cabin, shattering the one small window and sending splinters of wood flying. Evelyn dropped flat, crawling across the floor to where Grace whimpered in terror. She threw herself over the child, shielding her with her own body. Jonah, already braced by the window, raised the pistol. He fired once, then again. 2 sharp cracks echoed through the cabin, and Thatcher himself. The gunfire outside faltered, replaced by the crunch of boots and shouted commands. Men were circling the cabin, surrounding it. Evelyn's eyes darted around the dim interior. No back door. The chimney far too narrow for even Grace to climb. 3 bullets left in her rifle. That was all. They'll rush us next, Jonah warned. Or smoke us out. Before Evelyn could answer, another sound rose above the wind, a distant jingle of harness bells. She froze, listening. Hoofbeats, many of them, pounding from the east. Riders, she whispered. For a heartbeat, hope flickered, but as quickly as it came, doubt extinguished it. Likely more of Thatcher's men, reinforcements sent to finish the job. The thunder of hooves grew louder, voices shouting against the wind. 12, maybe more. Thatcher cursed outside. What in blazes? Then a booming voice cut through the storm. James Thatcher, this is Sheriff Blackwood. You and your men are surrounded. Drop your weapons. Evelyn's heart lurched. She and Jonah exchanged stunned glances. Sheriff Blackwood Thatcher's loyal man, bought and paid for, was calling for Thatcher's surrender. You fool, Thatcher bellowed. I pay your wages. Not anymore, came the hard reply. The governor's office received some very interesting telegrams today from Isaac Miller in Miller's Crossing about missing families, stolen land, false charges. You've been exposed. Thatcher. Evelyn's breath caught. Isaac had sent word, reaching beyond Thatcher's grasp, straight to the authorities. Her chest tightened with gratitude for the quiet storekeeper who had risked everything. Lay down your arms, Blackwood commanded. It's over. Chaos followed. Thatcher's men shouted. Gunfire cracked. The dogs howled in confusion. Evelyn clutched Grace against her, rocking her gently while Jonah placed himself in front of them both, pistol useless but spirit unbroken. The storm howled its last fury outside, then silence. Only the faint hiss of snow on the cabin roof remained. A knock came at the door. McBride, Miss Hart, this is Sheriff Blackwood. You're safe now. Jonah moved carefully, opening the door a crack with the empty pistol raised just in case. Outside stood mounted riders, lawmen, and townsfolk from Ashford Hollow. Among them, Evelyn recognized the Caldwell brothers, Esther's boys, rifles at the ready. It's truly over, Jonah asked, voice rough with disbelief. Blackwood gave a grave nod. Thatcher's in custody. His men, too. Those still breathing. The child needs a doctor and shelter. We've got a wagon waiting. Evelyn rose on trembling legs, pulling Grace up with her. Thatcher will have allies, men in high places who'll try to shield him. Not anymore, the sheriff said firmly. Not after what Isaac Miller sent to the governor. Every detail laid out murder, land theft, bribes, 2 decades of corruption. Samuel Carter documented it all before he died, and Miller made sure it reached the right hands. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt a weight ease from her chest. Carter's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. The truth had reached beyond these mountains. Jonah's gaze softened as he looked at her, then at Grace, then back to the snow-covered world outside. It might finally be finished, he murmured. But Evelyn knew deep down the hardest part was yet to come. By sending his journal ahead, he ensured Thatcher's crimes would be uncovered, whether he lived or fell in the fight. When Evelyn Hart realized this, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for the old hunter. He had carried the burden of silence too long, but in the end, he had found his courage. "Come now," Marshal Granger urged from outside. "The storm's breaking. We need to get you all back to town." They stepped out of the trapper's cabin into a world transformed. The blizzard had passed as if washed away by some higher hand. Under the glow of a moon breaking through torn clouds, the land glittered like crystal. Snow stretched unbroken across the Ironwood Peaks, silver and pure. Not far off, James Thatcher sat bound to a horse, his face dark with fury. His men were likewise restrained, their bravado gone, eyes cast down. The man who had terrorized 2 territories was now nothing more than a prisoner. "Miss Hart," Marshal Granger said as deputies lifted her and Grace into the waiting wagon. His voice carried both regret and resolve. "I owe you an apology, and so does every decent soul in Ashford Hollow. We trusted Thatcher's lies for far too long." Evelyn was too weary to answer. Her focus was on Grace, tucking blankets tight around the little girl. Jonah climbed into the wagon beside them, his body still aching from the icy plunge in the creek. Yet his presence, broad shoulders, steady eyes was enough to ease Evelyn's trembling. The wagon lurched forward, carrying them down the frozen trail toward Ashford Hollow. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Evelyn allowed her thoughts to wander past mere survival. Thatcher was in chains. The evidence was safe. Jonah's innocence would be proven. In his eyes was more than relief. There was warmth, a question unspoken, and the fragile beginnings of hope. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked softly. "Now," he said with quiet certainty, "we heal, all of us, between them." Grace stirred. Her fever had broken, her breathing steadier, her small face peaceful at last. The years of solitude she had borne in her mountain cabin seemed distant, as though they belonged to another life. The future was still uncertain, filled with trials to come. Thatcher's allies might whisper in courtrooms and smoke-filled parlors. Justice was never simple, never guaranteed, but she would not face it alone. She had Jonah, a healer whose strength went beyond his hands, and Grace, a child who carried the memory of all who came before her. His arm came around her, steady and protective. "Rest," he murmured. "I'll wake you when we reach town." She surrendered to the rhythm of the wagon wheels, to the lull of horse hooves striking snow. For the first time in years, Evelyn Hart slept without fear, without loneliness, without the crushing weight of isolation. Above them, the storm clouds broke apart, revealing a wide sky jeweled with stars. The Ironwood Peaks rose around them, ancient and enduring, silent witnesses to both suffering and triumph. And in that silence, Evelyn felt it a whisper, carried on the night wind. Willow Sky and those who had fallen could finally rest. Their voices had been heard. Their story had not been buried. Their legacy lived on in Grace, who would grow up knowing her worth and her heritage. The mountains, eternal and patient, bore witness as justice and healing unfolded in their shadow. Evelyn Hart spent years believing she had no place in the world, her scars and loneliness convincing her that love had passed her by. Your support keeps these stories alive, carrying the spirit of the frontier into our hearts. If this tale touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. So together, we can keep exploring the timeless power of love and courage.